and welcome to this month's episode of Money Mountaineering with Peter Neuwirth, actuary and author. I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, so thrilled to be here. I am the producer and the founder of Incandescent Public Relations. We are here talking with amazing Richard Conn, who is the author of the Earthbound Parent. He also has done amazing work in Russia. He is an international chess champ. And we are so excited to talk about the sharing economy tonight. So Pete, take it away.
Well, thanks a lot, Hope. And Richard, I'm so thrilled that you've agreed to come back. And I say come back because, as many of you know who have been listening, I had Richard and his friend and partner Leland Faust on the show a while ago. Richard and Leland are champions of the proposition that critical thinking is in short supply these days and is something that we all should be encouraging. Now, on that podcast, we talked a lot about Leland's book, which was about all the ways that Wall Street deceives and plays games with customers, and that prevents people from thinking critically and rationally about their money. But Richard's also written a book. He's written a very good book called The Earthbound Parent, where he focuses on helping kids learn to think critically. At that last podcast, we talked about Richard's recommendation that kids not have TV and learn to play chess, which I think are great bits of advice. But tonight, we're going to go a little deeper into Richard's view of critical thinking. And I guess I really love the way you put it, Richard, which is that reality is the road to happiness, and reality is what we all should be trying to see and think about. And what I'd like to start off with is sort of, as I read your book, the basic message there that I took from it was that there are a lot of things that get in the way of critical thinking, a lot of fears and desires and things. And I'd like to start there. And if you could share a little bit about what you see as the impediments to critical thinking and how we overcome them.
Sure, I'd be glad to do that, Pete. The Earthbound Parent is really focused on the idea that all of us share, certain psychological traits, if you will, certain fears and desires. An example might be the fear of death, the desire for immortality, and that we find ways to deal with that. And many people, as I write in the book, turn to some supernatural belief system for that. And I encourage people to go in a different direction, more reality-based direction, to deal with those fears and desires. In terms of what gets in the way, all of the ones that I describe in the book, and there are maybe 15 sort of different sets that I think are relevant to most people. The one that I think is probably the most powerful is that which is based on what I will call either the general fear or survival instinct, the desire to be safe, the desire for security. Mm-hmm. I think when that kicks in, we all know about the fear-flight reaction. It's without any question, it's an impediment to people being able to think clearly. Some examples, that might bring it to life would be the simple one when you are watching your stocks in the stock market and something horrible goes wrong with one of your picks. That can result in your brain almost going into a freeze mode, some panic mode. Same thing can happen if you're playing a chess game and you suddenly realize that you've made a horrible mistake and you're for a few moments praying and hoping that your opponent doesn't see it. Right. There is a visceral reaction in those instances. And those are the examples I might give of the sort of instantaneous, quick sort of survival instinct that kicks in. And I can give, many examples that are more serious in the world in terms of conflicts
Right.
that take place because different countries, nations, groups are fearful or concerned about their survival and are willing to take steps to address that are extreme and sometimes are not reality based.
Right. Right. But you also talk about, I mean, on the flip side, you also talk about the desires that actually also get in the way, the things that we crave. I mean, I think you talk about the craving control and craving belonging and various other things. I mean, it's really two sides of the same coin, maybe. I don't know.
That is how I see it. And in the Earthbound Parent, I do, set up about 15 different sort of pairs. And I gave the example of desire for immortality versus fear of death. And you gave another of uncertainty versus that it is the fear of uncertainty and the desire for certainty in those situations. I think that most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, will see those pairings in our own lives and can then start to look at how do we deal with that. And I have friends who've taught me to sort of, for example, embrace uncertainty and sort of view that as actually a natural state. And you have to, certainly as an investor or just living your life, you have to recognize that much of life is uncertain. I always tell people, who talk about chess as a complicated game, my response is no, it's actually a simple game compared to real life. In chess, everything is right in front of you on the board. You each have your pieces, you got 64 squares. Real life is far more uncertain.
Right.
I don't know what you're thinking. I barely know what I'm thinking. You have interactions with all sorts of people. It's an incredibly complex world. And so if you're not able to sort of live with uncertainty and just take it easy with that, you're going to have problems.
Right. But you see the key. I mean, now, of course, it's all great for us to talk about what gets in the way and what the problem is, but the solutions and the solution that you've sort of come to is that you got to start early. You got to start with the next generation. Or am I not quite getting it right?
You're getting it right in part, Pete. As I wrote at the beginning of the book, I wrote this book over 40 years. And during that time period, it morphed into a parenting / philosophical book. And the reason for that was I didn't want to write a book that merely pointed out the problems that we have in our society and in our ethical structures by relying on sort of supernatural belief systems, which I view as extremely divisive, tribal, and harmful in many ways, and unnecessary to have an ethical society. But my feeling, Pete, was that the vast majority of people who would read that would have difficulty changing their own minds and would be set in their ways. So really the way I sort of came at it was to encourage parents in particular who are reaching the decisions about how to raise their children to at least consider the possibility of doing it without passing along the same traditions that their parents passed along to them. And when I say traditions, I don't mean the foods and the culture. I mean the ideas that they're related to a supernatural being, in some way. That type of structure I utilize because I do think that in order to extirpate the deeply ingrained infrastructure of the supernatural in our societies, which has been here for thousands of years, you need to take it step by step. And so that's why I wrote a book that really is, on the one hand, I think of value to anyone who wants to think about their place in the universe and how our society is structured, but is really geared towards those decisions by parents.
Right. But you also are a very strong advocate of chess as a metaphor and as a method for teaching critical thinking as well. And I know that they've had many chess in schools programs and so forth. Are there other? Well, I guess I'd love to hear you talk more about how chess can foster critical thinking and how it can combat some of these other magical and other supernatural thinkings that fall prey.
So, there's a lot in life that promotes critical thinking. Chess is among those. In the book, I lay out many ideas for it. Obviously, I've encouraged my children and taught them music and all sorts of different parts of life. And you're right, I have discouraged passive activities like television, although, we have exposed them to, my wife and I, to expose them to different things on the internet that we, want them to see, but we just don't open up, the entire world to them for to have a passive existence watching television. The reason I like chess as an example for parents to teach children is because kids seem to love it so much. And because it does give them so many different skill sets. The obvious ones at the early ages is it gives them a spatial sense, and being able to manipulate pieces around a board gives them the ability to calculate, to utilize their memory to certain degrees, to make decisions on their own. And I'm a big fan of accountability. I love the fact that when a child is playing chess, they're making the decisions, and they have to live with the outcome of those games. And then as I noted in the book, one of the other things I love about the game is it teaches humility, because anybody who's played chess has learned that they are fallible. We are all really fallible. And I think that's a nice counterpoint to the arrogance that you can get from belief in a supernatural being that promotes the idea of how special we are as human beings. I think it's much better to come at life with a much more humble attitude, work to learn, work to develop our critical, thinking skills. And also, if you play chess against computers and such things, you quickly see, just how difficult it is to calculate, to remember things. And it puts you in a mindset where you learn to think a little less of yourself, and to be amazed to the extent that you and others can do anything particularly well. It's again, it's a much more of a philosophy based on humility and I think chess brings that out.
Right. So, but a lot of I guess it wasn't the chess that brought you there, but you spent a lot of time in Russia with some really great chess players. But what you were doing in Russia was to help them reform the economy, as I understand it, and that was back in the 90s. And since most of my podcasts are about navigating through the world of money, maybe we can talk a little bit about your experiences in Russia and how trying to make that system a little bit more rational and more open to critical and rational thinking, where you met some success and where you met some failure, and what kind of lessons we can draw for navigating through financial troubles here.
And so, yes, I had an opportunity to be part of and to some degree lead a lot of the efforts to create the legal structure that was necessary to transition from the Soviet Union to the new country called the Russian Federation. And at the time, the aspiration of the leaders of that country was, to form a free market democratic society. And that's why at the time they were closely allied with the US. And a lot of our work was done in coordination with support from the US at that time. In answer to your, question, I've always found the Russians to be, quite rational and most of them embracing critical thinking. There is a tradition there of authoritarianism, which is tied to some degree with sort of religious authoritarianism, and that has come back, particularly in the Putin years. And that's an undercurrent against critical thinking. But generally speaking, their economy had been set up in a way that made sense to them. They were and are an oil and gas state largely, and some other raw materials. And in those environments, it's very easy to create an authoritarian structure. because you don't require the consent and cooperation of the vast majority of the population to pay taxes and to take actions together to have a full society. So the structure of their society back in the 90s and certainly today as well is really very different than what we in the West are accustomed to, simply because of that massive difference in terms of how the economy is structured. So they really, don't need to have all of the rules, regulations, and structures that we have in place in the United States to function at the level that their autocracy currently functions. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background on that before we get into specific, but I'm happy to answer more specific questions.
I mean, where I was going with that is, again, this is all from the outside, but what it appeared that people were subject to fears and desires and greed and perhaps, as you point out, and actually you mentioned in the book, this desire for guidance and somebody to tell you what to do. And all those things, I would think, prevented people from navigating their economically in a rational or a critical, using critical thinking to navigate their financial lives. And that's sort of where I was going.
Right. Yes, I mean, I can pick up on that. Certainly, one, there were and are very deeply entrenched relationships in Russia, meaning relationships that would preclude their desire to change how their society and their economy is structured. People were and are happy having control over, say, an oil company or an oil and gas company, and they don't want to change that. In addition, the society overall, and I think you hit this point, and you're absolutely right with it, Pete. The society overall is far more comfortable with the idea of being told what to do than we are in the West, and certainly in the United States. Most of us in the United States bristle at the idea of anybody telling us what to do, or at least, in certain instances, we may not mind stopping at a red light, but if someone tells us that it would save lives to get a vaccine, we'll, some people will just have an absolute, reaction to that and say, never will I be told or in any way pressured to do anything. In Russia, it's really quite different. It's a society that, has had czars in the past, had a very brief flirtation with democratic structures during the Yeltsin years. But the average Russian, and I met, again, hundreds, thousands, whatever, during my many years living over there, really was more comfortable with having a life that was almost Soviet in structure, with a guaranteed job, guaranteed benefits, no real entrepreneurship. Once they get into sort of that mental state, it I think is difficult for them to come out of that.
Yeah, when we had talked a while ago, you were actually more hopeful about things in America because we weren't starting from scratch trying to build something, but it does feel like things are chaotic, and people are. I mean, again, this is in my world of helping people navigate through the world of money. People are feeling like everything's chaotic and they're uncertain and they don't know what's going to happen, and they're looking for authority. They're looking for guidance. And I think what you're saying is it's better not to have that overarching authority, and better to find the way to overcome those fears of chaos, fears of uncertainty, fears of losing it all, and move forward in a rational, critical way.
I am saying that. I often, like as do others, make the silly joke that the U.S. has the worst economic structure of any country in the world except all the others, and same thing for legal system and everything else. I think we have to keep our expectations within reason. I don't, in the philosophy that I espouse, I don't think everything is supposed to be perfect. I don't think everything is supposed to be certain. I think uncertainty and difficulty is part of life. We have a large country here. What is it? 330 million people. We have a lot of diverse views. that's a strength. We have people from all over the world. So as we're doing international trade, we have a huge advantage because we have, people who speak the languages, who can interact. And we have freedoms in our country in terms of how our economy is structured and our laws are structured that allow people to be entrepreneurial and to feel they can create something new, build something, and not have it stolen. For those, who are listening or watching, who favor sort of a more autocratic structure, more of a strongman structure, I guess all I would say is, I've lived under that structure for a period, during the years when I was over in Russia under Putin. I can tell you, you won't like it. And, it's, if you want to just have news that is curated to support the view of the party that happens to be in power, try living in an autocratic regime. And you're really totally relying on, if you will, the benevolence of the dictator and those around him to take proper action. And that, of course, brings up, Machiavelli, right? I mean, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I saw that in Russia. That is what happens there. And it is not by nature. I want to be super clear about this. It's not because Russians are any different than we are. It is because their system, their structure is very different. Their economy, as I described, is different. Their position is different. And I can tell you this, if we ever make the mistake of getting in a posture where we have a real strong man in power and those around him effectively utilizing the tools to accomplish that, we would be in a world of hurt. And I hope people think carefully about it when they, consider whether they want the mess of a free market, free system and having, free and open elections, or whether they want to go down a road that is more tribal.
Well, and I hear you, and I actually agree with you. The challenge that in the people who I advise or advise to advise is that they're on their own, and they're not equipped to know all of the answers, and so they have to get advice. People need to get advice. They need to look to experts, and who's going to make sure that the experts are telling them the truth? I mean, I guess that's where critical thinking comes in, is that you got to be very, very clear about, is this person giving you good advice when they say buy this, variable annuity, when, maybe they have a financial interest in that.
So yes, hire experts like yourself and others who listen, I'm sure, do that for a living. And that's very important. But at the same time, you have to cross-check it. And one good way to know if you can rely on people, or whether it's a news outlet or other things, is look at your history in terms of, having gotten information from them, and whether the information you received ended up being borne out as from your perspective, truthful. So if you're getting information from an advisor and, you learn 2 or 3 times that they were wrong, well, you take that into account next time you get their advice. But I just don't think there's an easy solution in terms of embracing reality other than doing the hard work, taking responsibility for yourself, not blaming other people, not blaming the other group, for being bad or behind your problems. Our country will do far better as we take more responsibility for ourselves and keep working and keep coming up with new ideas for businesses and taking the initiative and being responsible for ourselves and not blaming others.
Then that's exactly what I've been preaching, that the only expert in your financial situation is you. And right. And I think that's a great way for us to because we need to wrap up here, and I think this is a great way to end it up, which is that critical thinking is necessary if you're going to rely on yourself, and critical thinking is hard, but it's worth it.
I think that's true. I'm sad we didn't get into our chess stories, and I can give you colorful anecdotes about some of the players. But yes, I agree. I think that as I've said, I think one of the points the Earthbound Parent makes is that one of the most important things one can do to embrace critical thinking is to utilize it in all aspects of life. So, don't, for example, on the most important issues in life, such as our place in the universe and how we think of ourselves as in our relationship to our fellow man, don't just close your eyes and say, I'm going to take it on faith that it's this or that. Use your critical thinking skills. It's a great place to hone them. And I think you'll find your relationships with other people improve as you look at all of us as in this together.
Great. Well, Richard, this has been fantastic, and I really appreciate the book is the book is The Earthbound Parent, and it's a really great book. I've got mine is fully notated all the way through, and there's lots and lots of insights and lots of very, very critical thinking and critical analysis of what you need to do to make your way. So thanks so much, Richard, and hope to see you again real soon.
Pete, it's always a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you both so very much. This was so fascinating. What's also fascinating to me is I tonight am in Venice, Italy with my son. Pete is in Northern California. Richard is in Connecticut / New York, and how we all work together to bring our viewpoints. And it's just a beautiful thing to have these conversations about thinking critically and using your wisdom, your internal and external wisdom. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, Pete. I'm sorry that my picture is not live, but it's about midnight here and the lighting is bad in this hotel room. So I thank you both. And I thank our audience for listening to Money Mountaineering with Peter Neuwirth, actuary and author. And we will bring you another episode next month. So stay tuned for more. Thank you all.